The emergency broadcast crackled through the static-filled radio as Marcus Reed pressed his back against the cold metal door of the communications tower, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning air. 3 weeks had passed since the first reports emerged from the coastal cities, 3 weeks since the world as humanity knew it began its violent descent into chaos. Marcus had been a radio technician before the outbreak, spending his days maintaining equipment for the local station in Richmond, Virginia, but now he found himself as one of the last voices reaching out into the darkness, desperately trying to connect survivors scattered across the devastated landscape. The zombies, as people had begun calling them, weren't like anything from the movies. They were faster, more relentless, and their numbers grew with terrifying speed. Each person bitten, each person killed, rose again within minutes to join the horde. Marcus adjusted the frequency on his transmitter, sending out the coordinates to a potential safe zone he'd heard about from another operator 2 days ago, when movement outside the tower's observation window caught his eye. Below, in the abandoned parking lot, he counted at least 40 of them, their gray-tinged skin and jerky movements unmistakable even from this height. They were attracted to the generator's hum, he realized with growing dread. His supplies would last another week at most, but the fuel for the generator would run out in 3 days, and without it he couldn't broadcast, couldn't fulfill the promise he'd made to keep the signal alive for anyone still listening, still hoping, still fighting to survive. The tower had become both his fortress and his prison, and Marcus knew that eventually he would have to make a choice between staying and slowly starving or making a run for it through the infected masses below. His hand unconsciously moved to the rifle propped against the control panel, checking for the 100th time that it was loaded and ready. He'd never been a violent man, had never even gone hunting with his father despite the old man's insistence, but he'd learned quickly that hesitation meant death in this new world. The radio suddenly burst to life with a woman's voice, clear and urgent, breaking through days of silence from other survivors. "This is Lieutenant Jessica Hammond of the United States Marine Corps, broadcasting on emergency frequency 773. If anyone can hear this, we have established a defensible position at the old Riverside Industrial Complex, approximately 15 miles west of Richmond. We have food, water, medical supplies, and fortifications. We are armed and organized. If you can reach us, we will provide sanctuary. Repeat, this is Lieutenant Jessica Hammond." Marcus nearly knocked over his coffee cup in his rush to respond, his fingers fumbling with the transmission button. This was it, this was the hope he'd been broadcasting about, the reason to keep fighting. "Lieutenant Hammond, this is Marcus Reed at the WRVQ Communications Tower on Highway 60. I copy your transmission. I have been coordinating survivor locations and can relay information about safe routes and infected concentrations in the area. How many do you have at your location?" The pause seemed to stretch for an eternity before Jessica's voice returned, and he could hear the relief in her tone. "Marcus, we have 37 survivors here, including 6 with military training, 2 doctors, and various civilians with useful skills. We've been reinforcing our position, but we need information about the surrounding areas. Can you provide reconnaissance from your location?" Marcus moved to the window, scanning the landscape with his binoculars, noting the smoke rising from several locations across the city, the abandoned vehicles clogging the highways, and the clusters of zombies wandering aimlessly through the streets. "Affirmative, Lieutenant. I have a clear view of most of the eastern approaches to your location. Be advised, the main highways are completely blocked and heavily infested. However, I've been tracking movement patterns, and there appears to be a window of reduced activity during the early morning hours just before dawn. The infected seem to be less active in the cold." As Marcus continued his conversation with Jessica, plotting possible routes and sharing critical information, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The zombies in the parking lot below weren't wandering anymore, they were gathering, organizing in a way he hadn't seen before, almost as if they were preparing for something. And they were all looking up, directly at his tower, their dead eyes fixed on the windows where he stood, their numbers growing by the minute as more emerged from the surrounding buildings and streets. Marcus stumbled backward from the window, his heart hammering against his rib cage as the reality of his situation crystallized with brutal clarity. The horde below had swelled to nearly 200, their collective moaning creating a sound that vibrated through the metal structure of the tower itself. He grabbed the radio transmitter, his voice urgent as he reconnected with Jessica Hammond. "Lieutenant, I have a situation here. The infected are massing at my location, and I don't think this tower will remain secure much longer. I need to evacuate, but I'm going to need help. There was a brief crackle of static before Jessica's voice returned, steady and commanding despite the dire news. Marcus, give me your exact location and the tower's structural details. We're going to get you out of there, but I need you to stay calm and follow my instructions precisely. As Marcus relayed the information, he heard voices in the background on Jessica's end, people mobilizing, plans being formed. She came back on the line with a proposal that sounded equal parts brilliant and insane. We're sending a rescue team. Thomas Rodriguez and his brother Daniel are former firefighters, and they know that area well. They'll be accompanied by Vanessa Blake, who was a police tactical officer, and James Mitchell, ex-Army Ranger. They'll create a distraction to draw the horde away from your position while you make your way to the extraction point 3 blocks north at the Old Methodist Church. Can you make it 3 blocks? Marcus looked at his meager supplies, the rifle with maybe 30 rounds of ammunition, a knife and a backpack with some food and water. 3 blocks through a city filled with the undead seemed like 3 miles, but staying here meant certain death. I can make it, he said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. The rescue team left the Riverside Industrial Complex within 20 minutes, loaded into a reinforced delivery truck that Thomas had modified with metal plating and reinforced bumpers. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat, checking her weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this too many times before, while James and Daniel prepared their distraction devices in the back, homemade noise makers constructed from car batteries, speakers and motion sensors that would draw the infected away from Marcus's location. Thomas navigated the abandoned streets with careful precision, avoiding the obvious clusters of zombies while maintaining enough speed to prevent any stragglers from latching onto the vehicle. Radio check. Jessica's voice came through their communications system. Team, you're approximately 10 minutes from the tower. Marcus, can you see any change in the horde's behavior? Marcus pressed himself against the window again, noting that some of the zombies had begun testing the tower's base structure, pushing against the metal supports with their bodies. They're getting more aggressive, Lieutenant. I don't know how much time I have before they compromise the structural integrity. James leaned forward from the back of the truck, his weathered face serious. Marcus, listen to me carefully. When we activate the distraction, you're going to have maybe 5 minutes before they start returning to your location. You cannot stop, you cannot hesitate, and you cannot try to help anyone you might see along the way. Your only objective is reaching that church. Understood? The weight of those words settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. In the old world, such instructions would have seemed cruel, but survival had rewritten the rules of human compassion. Understood, Marcus replied, already gathering his supplies and preparing for the most dangerous sprint of his life. The rescue team arrived at the deployment point 2 blocks east of the communications tower, and Thomas brought the truck to a stop behind the burned-out shell of a shopping center. Vanessa and James quickly unloaded the distraction devices, positioning them at strategic intervals that would lead the horde away from both Marcus's escape route and their own extraction path. Devices armed and ready, James reported. Marcus, on my mark you move. 3, 1, a mark. The devices erupted with a cacophony of sound, sirens, music, breaking glass, car alarms, a symphony of noise that immediately captured the attention of every zombie within hearing distance. Marcus watched in amazement as the horde below turned almost as one, their heads swiveling toward the source of the disturbance, their bodies beginning to shuffle and then run toward the sounds. He didn't waste another second. Throwing his backpack over his shoulders and gripping his rifle, Marcus burst through the tower's lower door and ran. The cold morning air burned his lungs as his feet pounded against the cracked pavement. He could hear the moaning of stragglers, see movement in his peripheral vision, but he kept his focus forward, just as James had instructed. A zombie lurched from behind an overturned car, its grabbing hands missing Marcus by inches as he dodged and kept running. Gunfire erupted somewhere to his left, the rescue team providing cover fire for threats he couldn't even see. 1 block down, his legs already burning with exertion. A woman's zombie, still wearing a tattered business suit, stumbled into his path, and Marcus had no choice but to use his rifle, the shot echoing through the empty streets. 2 blocks, and he could see the church's white steeple rising above the surrounding buildings. More zombies were emerging from buildings, drawn by the gunfire and his movement, but the distraction was holding, keeping the main horde occupied. Marcus pushed himself harder, faster, his entire world narrowing to the simple act of reaching that church, of surviving just one more minute, one more second, in this nightmare world that demanded everything and promised nothing. Marcus crashed through the church's heavy wooden doors with such force that he nearly collapsed onto the dusty floor, his lungs screaming for oxygen as Thomas Rodriguez appeared from behind a pew and slammed the doors shut behind him, dropping a heavy wooden beam across them to secure the entrance. "Welcome to the party," Thomas said with a grim smile, extending a hand to help Marcus to his feet. The interior of the church was dimly lit by afternoon sunlight filtering through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across rows of empty pews. Vanessa Blake stood watch at one of the side windows, her pistol held ready, while Daniel Rodriguez worked quickly to barricade another entrance with whatever furniture he could find. James Mitchell appeared from the church's back rooms, his expression serious. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before the distraction devices run out of power and those things start spreading out again. The truck's positioned at the rear exit, engine running. We need to move now." Marcus nodded, still catching his breath, but grateful beyond words for these strangers who had risked their lives to save his. As they moved toward the back of the church, a sound stopped them all in their tracks, a child's whimpering coming from somewhere above them in the choir loft. Vanessa's head snapped toward the sound, her tactical training warring with her humanity. "We don't have time for this," she whispered harshly, but even as she said it, her feet were already moving toward the stairs. James grabbed her arm. "Vanessa, we have protocols for a reason. We cannot risk the group for—" The words died in his throat as a small face appeared at the railing above, a girl no more than 8 years old, her dark hair matted and her clothes torn, but her eyes bright with terror and hope. "Please," the child whispered. "Please don't leave me here. They took my daddy. I've been hiding for 2 days." The team exchanged glances, and Marcus saw the weight of command settling on James's shoulders, the impossible calculations that defined survival in this new world. Every additional person meant more mouths to feed, more people to protect, more potential liability. But she was a child, and there were some lines that, once crossed, meant losing the very humanity they were fighting to preserve. "Vanessa, Daniel, secure the child and do a quick sweep of the upper level. Thomas, Marcus, get to the truck. We leave in 5 minutes, whether that sweep is complete or not." Vanessa was already bounding up the stairs, her movements swift and sure. She reached the girl and knelt down, her voice softening in a way that surprised Marcus. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Vanessa. What's your name?" The girl's voice trembled as she replied, "Emily. Emily Watson. Are you here to save me?" Vanessa pulled the child into a quick embrace. "Yes, Emily. We're going to get you somewhere safe. But I need you to be very brave and very quiet. Can you do that for me?" Emily nodded vigorously, and Vanessa lifted her onto her hip, scanning the choir loft with professional efficiency. Daniel moved past them, checking the small rooms and storage areas, when his foot knocked against something metallic. He looked down to find a small cache of supplies, canned food, bottled water, blankets, and a hunting rifle with ammunition. "Someone was prepared," Daniel called out softly. "Looks like Emily's father was planning for a long stay." The discovery was bittersweet, evidence of a parent's desperate attempt to protect his child, a plan that had ultimately failed but had kept the girl alive long enough for rescue. Thomas had the truck's rear doors open when the rest of the team emerged from the church, Emily clinging to Vanessa's neck. Marcus climbed in first, followed by Daniel, then Vanessa carefully handed Emily up before pulling herself inside. James performed a final visual sweep of their surroundings, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The distraction devices had finally died, and the horde was spreading out again, searching. Worse, they seemed to be moving with more purpose now, almost as if they were learning, adapting. "We've got company incoming, multiple directions," James said tersely as he climbed into the passenger seat. "Thomas, get us out of here. Route Charlie back to base." The truck's engine roared to life, and Thomas navigated through the narrow alley behind the church, emerging onto a side street that was momentarily clear. But their movement attracted immediate attention. Zombies began emerging from buildings, from behind cars, from every shadow and doorway. Thomas pushed the accelerator down, and the reinforced bumper of the truck smashed through several zombies that were too slow to move aside, the sickening impacts reverberating through the vehicle. Emily buried her face in Vanessa's shoulder, and the former police officer whispered soothing words while keeping one hand on her weapon. Marcus watched through the rear window as the church they'd just left was swarmed by infected, and he felt a wave of gratitude for the split-second decisions that had saved his life and now Emily's. "Roadblock ahead," Thomas announced, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. A mass of abandoned vehicles completely blocked the street, and zombies were already climbing over the wreckage, drawn by the sound of their engine. Taking alternate route. Thomas spun the wheel hard, sending the truck careening down a narrow residential street. Houses that had once been homes stood with broken windows and open doors, each one a potential hiding place for the infected. A zombie lunged from a driveway directly into their path, and Thomas couldn't avoid it. The impact threw the creature over the hood and into the windshield, which cracked but held. The zombie's face pressed against the glass for a horrifying moment, its dead eyes staring directly at them before it slid off and disappeared beneath their wheels. "This is taking too long," James said, checking his watch and the ammunition count on his rifle. "We're going to run into the evening activity surge if we don't pick up the pace." Marcus had heard about this phenomenon from other survivors on the radio. The zombies seemed to become more active and aggressive as darkness approached, their hunting behavior intensifying with nightfall. Daniel leaned forward from the back. "What about the industrial park route? Cuts through the old factory district, less residential, probably fewer infected." Thomas considered it for a moment, then nodded. "It's exposed, but it might be our best shot." He took the next right turn hard, sending everyone in the back sliding across the metal floor. Emily let out a small cry of fear and Vanessa held her tighter. "It's okay, baby. We're almost there. Almost safe." But even as she said the words, Vanessa wondered if anywhere was truly safe anymore. The Riverside Industrial Complex was defensible, yes, but it was also a prison of sorts, a tiny island of humanity in an ocean of death. The truck burst through a chain-link fence at the industrial park's entrance, the metal screaming as it tore away from its posts. The vast parking lots and massive warehouse buildings created an eerie landscape of concrete and shadows. Here the zombies were fewer but moved in small packs, their behavior suggesting some kind of rudimentary group coordination that terrified Marcus more than the mindless individual creatures. "There," James pointed ahead. "The complex is just beyond that ridge. We're going to make it." But fate had other plans. As Thomas accelerated toward their destination, the truck's engine suddenly coughed, sputtered, and died. The vehicle coasted forward on momentum alone, rolling to a stop still half a mile from the safety of the Riverside Industrial Complex. Thomas turned the key desperately, but the engine only clicked in response. "No, no, no," he muttered, trying again and again. James was already on the radio. "Lieutenant Hammond, this is rescue team. We are stranded approximately 800 meters from the complex perimeter. Engine failure. We have Marcus and one additional survivor, a child. Request immediate assistance." Jessica's voice came back immediately, tight with tension. "Copy that, James. We see your position. Reinforcements are mobilizing now. Can you defend your location?" James looked at the growing number of zombies that were already turning toward their stopped vehicle, drawn by the sound of the failed engine and the scent of living flesh. He checked his ammunition again, did the math in his head, and knew the answer before he spoke it. "Negative, Lieutenant. We're going to have to run for it." The team poured out of the disabled truck with practiced efficiency, each member knowing without discussion what needed to be done. James took point position, his rifle ready, while Thomas moved to Emily and scooped her up in his arms despite her protests that she could run. "Save your energy, kiddo," he said firmly. "You're going to need it later." Vanessa and Daniel formed the rear guard, their weapons tracking the zombies that were already closing in from multiple directions. Marcus positioned himself in the middle, his own rifle clutched tightly, trying to remember everything he'd learned about survival in these past 3 weeks. The industrial park stretched before them like a concrete wasteland, offering minimal cover but multiple approach angles for the infected. "Staggered formation, maintain 5-meter spacing," James commanded, his military training taking over. "We move fast but controlled. If someone falls, the person nearest helps them up. Nobody gets left behind unless they're bitten. Those are the rules." The words hung in the air, a grim reminder of the harsh mathematics of survival. They began moving, a quick jog that ate up ground while conserving energy. Behind them, the moans of the zombies grew louder as more of the creatures emerged from the warehouses and maintenance buildings. Marcus risked a glance back and immediately wished he hadn't. There had to be at least 70 of them now, a growing wave of death shambling and running in their direction. "Contact left," Vanessa called out, and Marcus turned to see a small group of 5 zombies emerging from behind a loading dock, cutting across their path. James didn't break stride, simply raised his rifle and fired 3 precise shots. 3 zombies dropped, their bodies crumpling to the pavement. The remaining 2 kept coming and Daniel stepped forward, dispatching them with controlled bursts from his pistol. The gunfire echoed across the industrial park like a dinner bell, and Marcus watched in horror as zombies began appearing from every direction, drawn by the noise. The Riverside Industrial Complex was visible now, its reinforced walls and guard towers standing like a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. Floodlights suddenly blazed to life from the complex's perimeter, illuminating their desperate flight and the nightmare pursuing them. Covering fire, covering fire. Jessica Hammond's voice boomed across a loudspeaker from the complex. Immediately, gunfire erupted from the walls, the defenders taking aim at the zombies closing in on the rescue team. Marcus saw infected dropping all around them, but for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. A zombie lunged from behind an overturned dumpster, grabbing at Marcus's backpack. He spun instinctively, bringing his rifle around and firing point-blank into the creature's face. The zombie's grip released and Marcus stumbled forward, his heart racing. "Keep moving," James shouted. 200 meters to the gate. But 200 meters might as well have been 2 miles. The zombies were converging from all sides now, a tightening noose of undead flesh and gnashing teeth. Thomas's breathing grew labored as he ran with Emily in his arms, the girl's small frame still a significant burden at a full sprint. Vanessa moved up beside him. "Thomas, give her to me. You're faster without the weight." Thomas didn't argue, transferring Emily to Vanessa's arms mid-stride. The former police officer adjusted the child's position and kept running, her athletic conditioning evident in her fluid movements. Daniel suddenly cried out, and Marcus turned to see him stumbling, a zombie's hand wrapped around his ankle. The creature had been lying among the dead, waiting, and now it pulled itself up Daniel's leg, mouth opening wide. "Daniel?" Thomas screamed, reversing direction, but James was faster. The ex-ranger moved with lethal precision, his knife flashing as he drove it through the zombie's skull. Daniel kicked free, his face pale with the knowledge of how close he'd come to infection. I'm good," Daniel gasped, checking himself frantically for any breaks in his skin. "No bites, no scratches." James pulled him to his feet. "Then move." The team continued their desperate flight, but the incident had cost them precious seconds, and the horde had closed the gap. Marcus could hear the zombies behind them now, close enough that their individual moans separated from the collective sound. His legs burned with exertion, his lungs felt like they were being shredded with each breath, but he pushed harder, driven by pure survival instinct. "Main gate opening," the loudspeaker announced. "Rescue team direct approach, full sprint. Gate closes in 60 seconds whether you're through or not." The brutal pragmatism of the announcement shocked Marcus for only a moment before he understood. The complex couldn't risk leaving the gate open long enough for the horde to breach their defenses. 60 seconds to cover the remaining distance or die trying. The team found reserves of energy they didn't know they possessed, their bodies driven beyond normal limits by desperation and adrenaline. The gate loomed before them, a massive sliding barrier of reinforced metal that represented the difference between life and death. Defenders lined the walls above, their rifles creating a corridor of covering fire that the rescue team ran through. Marcus saw faces peering down at them, men, women, people who had found safety and were fighting to maintain it. A zombie appeared directly in Marcus's path, too close to shoot, and he did something he never imagined himself capable of. He lowered his shoulder and charged straight into the creature, knocking it aside with the force of his momentum. The impact sent pain radiating through his body, but he kept his feet and kept running. 30 seconds. The announcement rang out. Thomas reached the gate first, diving through with Daniel right behind him. Vanessa followed, clutching Emily protectively as bullets whizzed overhead. James maintained his position, providing covering fire for Marcus, who was falling behind. The weight of his equipment, his exhaustion, and his lack of physical conditioning compared to these hardened survivors was taking its toll. "Marcus, come on," James shouted, firing controlled bursts into the pursuing zombies. Marcus's vision narrowed to a tunnel, his entire world consisting of the gate ahead and the salvation it represented. His foot caught on some debris and he stumbled, nearly falling but caught himself at the last moment. 20 meters. 15. 10. A hand closed on his backpack and Marcus felt himself being pulled backward. Without thinking, he shrugged out of the straps, sacrificing his supplies and the zombie's grip for the momentum to keep moving forward. James grabbed his arm as he cleared the gate, physically pulling him through. Gate closing. The massive barrier began sliding shut with mechanical precision. Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping for air as the gate sealed with a heavy clang. Through the narrowing gap, he caught a final glimpse of the horde slamming against the metal barrier, their hands grasping futilely at the survivors they couldn't reach. The defenders above continued firing, thinning the crowd of zombies pressed against the complex's walls. Marcus felt hands helping him to his feet, voices asking if he was injured, if he'd been bitten. He shook his head, unable to form words, his mind still processing the fact that he was alive, that they'd all made it. Jessica Hammond approached, her military bearing evident in every movement despite being dressed in civilian clothes. "Welcome to Riverside," she said, extending her hand to Marcus. "That was one hell of an entrance." Marcus took her hand, using it to steady himself as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving him shaking and exhausted. Around him, he saw the complex properly for the first time, a sprawling industrial facility that had been transformed into a fortress. The buildings had been reinforced with metal sheeting and barricades, guard towers had been constructed at strategic points, and between the structures he could see gardens growing under makeshift greenhouse covers, evidence of long-term planning and survival thinking. People emerged from the buildings, drawn by the commotion. Marcus saw children among them, families, elderly people, a cross-section of humanity that had somehow found safety in this pocket of resistance. Emily squirmed out of Vanessa's arms and stood on shaky legs, her eyes wide as she took in her new surroundings. "Is this place real?" Emily asked in a small voice. "Are we really safe?" Jessica knelt down to the child's eye level, her tough exterior softening. "It's real, sweetheart. Welcome home." But even as she said the words, Marcus noticed the strain in Jessica's expression, the worry that lingered behind her eyes. He'd been a communications operator long enough to read people's underlying concerns, and he realized that while they'd escaped the immediate danger, the Riverside Industrial Complex faced challenges of its own. The sanctuary they'd fought so hard to reach might not be as secure as it first appeared. Thomas approached Marcus, clapping him on the shoulder. "You did good out there. Not bad for a radio guy." Marcus managed a weak smile. "I had good teachers." As the group was led deeper into the complex toward the medical station for evaluation, Marcus looked back at the main gate where defenders still stood watch. Beyond those walls, the world had fallen to the zombies, billions of people lost to the infection in a matter of weeks. But here, in this fortress of metal and determination, humanity was making its stand. The question that haunted Marcus as exhaustion finally overcame him was simple but profound. How long could they hold out, and what would become of them when the walls finally failed? The night was just beginning, and with it came the sound of thousands of zombies, their collective moaning a constant reminder that the fight for survival was far from over. Marcus woke to pale morning light filtering through the dusty windows of what had once been a factory supervisor's office, now converted into sleeping quarters for new arrivals. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache, every muscle protesting as he sat up on the thin mattress. The events of the previous day felt almost dreamlike in their intensity, but the rifle propped against the wall beside him served as a stark reminder that the nightmare was very real. A soft knock on the door preceded Jessica Hammond's entrance, carrying a tray with what appeared to be oatmeal and a cup of something resembling coffee. "Morning," she said, setting the tray on a makeshift table constructed from shipping pallets. "Figured you'd be hungry. How are you feeling?" Marcus accepted the food gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten since the previous morning at the tower. "Like I got hit by a truck full of zombies," he replied, managing a tired smile. "But alive, which is more than I had any right to expect yesterday." Jessica pulled up a folding chair and sat down, her expression shifting to something more serious. "Marcus, I've been reviewing the communications logs you kept at the tower. Your tracking of zombie movement patterns, the survivor locations, the resource caches you documented, it's impressive work. We need someone with your skills and knowledge. Our current communications setup is basic at best, and we've lost contact with several other survivor groups over the past week. I want you to take over our radio operations." The offer caught Marcus off guard, though he supposed he shouldn't have been surprised. In this new world, everyone needed to contribute, needed to have a purpose beyond simple survival. "I'd be honored, Lieutenant. When do I start?" Jessica's expression softened slightly. "Call me Jessica. Military ranks feel a bit obsolete when we're all just trying to stay alive. And you start after you've rested and had a full medical evaluation. Dr. Richard Foster needs to clear you first, standard protocol for everyone who comes through those gates." The medical station occupied the ground floor of the complex's main administrative building, a space that had been transformed into a functional clinic complete with examination rooms, a small surgery, and a surprisingly well-stocked pharmacy. Dr. Foster turned out to be a man in his early 60s with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much death in recent weeks. His assistant, a young woman named Patricia Mills who had been a veterinary technician before the outbreak, helped Marcus through a thorough examination. No bites, no scratches, no signs of infection, Dr. Foster announced, making notes on a clipboard. You're lucky, son. We've had to turn away people at the gate who didn't fare so well. It never gets easier, condemning someone to death because they were unlucky enough to get bitten. The weight of those words settled over the room. Marcus had heard stories on the radio about the impossible choices survivors faced, the mercy killings, the people who chose to end their own lives rather than turn. How many people are here now? Marcus asked, trying to shift the conversation to something less bleak. Patricia answered while organizing medical supplies. We have 143 souls within these walls as of this morning. Emily makes 144. We've lost 12 people since we established this sanctuary 3 weeks ago, 4 to the infection, 3 to injuries sustained during supply runs, 2 to illness, and 3 who simply gave up and walked out the gate one night. The casual way she recited the deaths spoke to how normalized loss had become. Before Marcus could respond, shouting erupted from somewhere outside, followed by the sound of gunfire. Dr. Foster's expression tightened. That's the south wall. Something's happening. Marcus followed Jessica and a group of armed defenders toward the source of the commotion, his newly cleared rifle in hand. They climbed a metal staircase to the south wall's observation platform, where he got his first clear view of the area beyond the complex's perimeter. What he saw made his blood run cold. The zombie horde that had chased them the previous day hadn't dispersed as expected. Instead, hundreds of infected had gathered around the southern barrier, and they were doing something Marcus had never seen before. They were working together. The zombies at the front were pushing against the reinforced fence, while those behind them added their weight, creating a coordinated pressure against the structure. Even more disturbing, some of the zombies were picking up debris and throwing it at the fence, testing it, probing for weaknesses. They're evolving, said a voice beside Marcus. He turned to find James Mitchell, the ex-Army Ranger, studying the horde through binoculars. We've been noticing it for about a week now. They're getting smarter, more coordinated. Whatever this infection is, it's not just reanimating dead tissue, it's changing it, adapting it. Vanessa Blake joined them on the platform, her face grim. The fence won't hold if they keep this up. That section was damaged during a breach attempt last week, and we haven't had the materials to properly repair it. Jessica raised her voice to address the defenders. Conservation of ammunition. Aim shots only at any infected that breach the fence line. Do not waste bullets trying to thin the horde, we can't afford it. The rationale was sound but troubling. If they couldn't afford to reduce the zombie numbers through attrition, they were essentially waiting for the fence to fail. Marcus could see the same calculation playing out on the faces around him. Everyone knew this was a losing proposition in the long term. Thomas Rodriguez appeared, slightly out of breath from running. Jessica, we've got another problem. The water purification system is failing. Daniel's down there trying to fix it, but he says we're looking at maybe 3 days of clean water left if he can't get it working properly. Jessica closed her eyes briefly, and Marcus saw the weight of command etched in the lines of her face. She was barely 30 years old, thrust into a leadership position by virtue of her military training and the vacuum created by the world's collapse. Now she was responsible for the lives of 144 people with dwindling resources, evolving threats, and infrastructure that was never designed for long-term habitation. All right, Jessica said, opening her eyes with renewed determination. Marcus, I need you to get the communications array operational immediately. We need to locate other survivor groups, establish supply lines, find out if there are any government or military elements still functioning out there. Thomas, work with your brother on the water situation. Vanessa, I want you to assess our ammunition supplies and start rationing protocols. James, you're with me. We need to develop a plan for reinforcing that south wall before it becomes a catastrophic failure point. The group dispersed to their assignments, and Marcus found himself being led by a teenager named Christopher Hayes to the complex's communications center. The setup was indeed basic. A single ham radio, a citizens band radio, and a police scanner, all powered by a generator that sputtered concerningly. It's not much, Christopher admitted. I've been manning it, but I'm just a gamer kid who watched some YouTube videos about radios before the internet went down. I have no idea what I'm really doing. Marcus sat down at the equipment, his trained eye immediately spotting inefficiencies and problems. First thing we need is a better antenna array. The current setup is limiting our range to maybe 50 miles at best. Second, we need a backup power source, solar panels if we can find them. Third, we need to establish regular broadcast times so other survivors know when to listen for us. Over the next several hours, Marcus lost himself in the work, the familiar technical challenges providing a welcome distraction from the existential threat pressing against the complex's walls. Christopher proved to be a quick learner, and together they managed to improve the radio setup considerably using spare parts scavenged from the industrial buildings. As evening approached, Marcus began broadcasting on multiple frequencies, sending out carefully crafted messages that provided hope without revealing too much about their location or resources. "This is Riverside calling any survivors. We are a secure facility with medical support, food, and shelter. If you can hear this message and are in need of assistance, respond with your location and number of survivors. We will attempt contact and possible extraction. This is Riverside broadcasting hope in the darkness." The responses came slowly at first, then with increasing frequency. A family of 4 trapped in a farmhouse 30 miles north. A group of college students holed up in a campus library. A former police officer with his elderly mother. Each voice represented lives hanging in the balance, people desperate for the sanctuary that Riverside offered. But with each response, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. They were offering hope to people they might not be able to save, making promises that the complex's strained resources might not be able to keep. As if to underscore this concern, the lights in the communications center flickered and dimmed. Through the window, Marcus could see the southern fence bowing inward under the relentless pressure of the zombie horde. A grinding metal sound echoed across the complex, and someone began ringing the alarm bell. The fence was failing and night was falling, bringing with it the zombies' increased aggression. Marcus grabbed his rifle and headed for the door, Christopher following close behind. Jessica's voice crackled over the complex's PA system, calm but urgent. "All defenders to the south wall. This is not a drill. Families and non-combatants to the emergency shelter in Building 3. Move quickly but do not panic. We've trained for this." As Marcus ran toward the sound of groaning metal and inhuman moans, he realized that the real test of Riverside's survival was about to begin, and morning felt like a lifetime away. The scene at the south wall was chaos barely contained by discipline and desperation. Marcus arrived to find defenders taking positions behind hastily constructed barricades as the fence buckled and twisted under the relentless pressure of hundreds of zombies. The metal screamed in protest, support posts beginning to tear free from their concrete foundations. Jessica stood at the center of the defensive line, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "First line, prepare for breach. Second line, hold position 20 meters back. Third line, protect the retreat path to Building 3. We funnel them through the kill zone and fall back in controlled stages. Nobody breaks formation, nobody runs. We've practiced this." Marcus found himself assigned to the second line alongside Thomas Rodriguez and a nervous young man named Kevin Harper who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Kevin's hands shook as he checked his shotgun, his face pale in the harsh glare of the floodlights that illuminated the wall. "First time?" Thomas asked, not unkindly. Kevin nodded, unable to speak. "Stay close to me," Thomas said. "Aim for the head, don't waste ammunition on body shots, and if someone near you goes down you pull them back if you can. But if they're bitten you step away. That's not cruelty, that's survival." The fence finally gave way with a tortured shriek of metal, a 20-foot section collapsing inward and creating a breach that the zombies immediately poured through. The first line of defenders opened fire, a disciplined volley that dropped the leading edge of the horde, but behind those that fell, dozens more pressed forward, climbing over the bodies of their fallen. "Steady," Jessica commanded. "Controlled fire. Make every shot count." Marcus raised his rifle, sighted on a zombie that had cleared the breach, and squeezed the trigger. The creature's head snapped back and it crumpled. He acquired another target, fired again, another kill. The mechanical nature of it helped keep the terror at bay, reduce it to technical problems, trajectories and sight pictures, and his mind could function despite the nightmare unfolding before him. The first line began falling back as planned, their ammunition running low, and the second line stepped forward to take their place. Marcus found himself shoulder to shoulder with Thomas and Kevin, firing into the mass of undead that funneled through the breach. The zombies' behavior was even more disturbing up close. They didn't simply charge mindlessly but moved with an unsettling coordination, some hanging back while others advanced, almost like wolves hunting in a pack. "They're flanking." Vanessa's shout rang out from the eastern edge of the defensive line. Marcus risked a glance and saw that a group of zombies had split off from the main breach and were working their way around the barricade, trying to get behind the defenders. James Mitchell was already moving, taking half a dozen defenders with him to intercept the flanking maneuver. The sound of gunfire intensified as they engaged this new threat. Kevin's shotgun ran dry, and the young man fumbled with shells, trying to reload with shaking hands. A zombie broke through a gap in the defensive fire, faster than the others, and lunged directly at Kevin. Thomas reacted instantly, shoving Kevin aside and firing point-blank into the creature's chest, slowing but not stopping it. Marcus pivoted and put a round through the zombie's skull just as its grabbing hands reached for Thomas. "Fall back to second position," Jessica ordered. The defenders retreated in stages, maintaining fire discipline, while the third defensive line provided covering fire from their elevated position on a loading dock. Marcus's arms ached from the rifle's recoil, his ears rang from the constant gunfire, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the sickly sweet stench of decomposing flesh. They reached the second defensive position, a barricade constructed from shipping containers and industrial equipment that created a narrow corridor. The zombies funneled into this kill zone, and the concentrated fire from three sides created a devastating crossfire. Bodies piled up, creating obstacles that slowed the horde's advance. But ammunition was running critically low. Marcus heard the clicks of empty magazines, saw defenders drawing backup weapons, knives and improvised clubs. The mathematics of survival were turning against them: too many zombies, too few bullets, and the night was still young. "We can't hold here much longer," Thomas said, reading the same calculations Marcus was. "We need to fall back to the final defensive position." Jessica was on her radio, coordinating with someone. She lowered it, her face grim. "Daniel reports the water purification building has been breached from the east side. We've got zombies inside the complex perimeter on two fronts now." The word sent a chill through Marcus. If the zombies had breached in multiple locations, they could be surrounded, cut off from the emergency shelter where the non-combatants had retreated. "We need to split our forces," James said, appearing with his interception team. 3 of the 6 defenders who had gone with him were missing. "I'll take a team to the water building, clear it and secure that breach. Jessica, you hold here with the main force." Jessica hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Take Marcus, Vanessa and whoever else you need. The rest of us will buy you time." Marcus felt a spike of fear at being separated from the main defensive line, but he understood the necessity. If the zombies established multiple strongholds within the complex, they would be overwhelmed from all sides. James assembled a team of 8 defenders, including Marcus, Vanessa, Christopher Hayes, and a burly construction worker named Robert Flynn who wielded a fire axe with practiced ease. "Fast and quiet," James instructed as they moved away from the main battle. "We clear the building room by room, secure the breach and get back to support the main line. Stay tight, watch your corners and call out threats before engaging if possible." The water purification building loomed ahead, its door hanging open, a dark maw that promised violence. James entered first, his rifle's mounted flashlight cutting through the darkness. The building's interior was a maze of pipes, tanks, and machinery that created countless hiding spots and ambush points. They moved in practiced formation, each person covering a sector, their lights creating overlapping fields of vision. The first zombie appeared from behind a water tank, and Vanessa dropped it with a suppressed shot to the head. 2 more came from a side room, and Robert's axe whistled through the air, the blade biting deep into the skull of the first while Christopher shot the second. They found Daniel Rodriguez in the main control room, barricaded behind an overturned desk, his leg bleeding from a deep gash. "Thank God," he gasped when he saw them. "They came through the east wall, must have found a weak point. I got this trying to seal the emergency door." Vanessa moved to assess his injury while James surveyed the breach. A section of corrugated metal wall had been torn away, creating an opening large enough for the zombies to enter. Outside, Marcus could see at least 20 more infected shambling toward the building, drawn by the noise of combat. "We need to seal this now," James said. "Robert, Christopher, find materials." Vanessa patched Daniel well enough to move. "Marcus, you're with me, we hold this opening until it's sealed." Marcus took position beside the breach, his rifle raised as James began firing controlled shots at the approaching zombies. Marcus joined in, and together they created a rhythm of fire that kept the infected from entering. Behind them, he could hear Robert and Christopher dragging metal sheeting and welding equipment into position. The zombies kept coming, relentless and uncaring of the bodies piling up in the breach. Marcus's rifle locked open on an empty magazine, his last one. He transitioned to his pistol, knowing he had perhaps 30 rounds left, and then it would come down to his knife and his will to survive. "Welding in progress," Robert shouted. 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds stretched into an eternity. Marcus's pistol grew hot in his hand as he fired round after round. A zombie made it through their defensive fire and lunged at James, who dropped his rifle and drew his combat knife, driving it up through the creature's jaw and into its brain with brutal efficiency. "Seal complete," Robert announced. "We need to reinforce it, but it'll hold for now." James grabbed a heavy shelving unit and dragged it in front of the sealed breach, and Marcus helped him pile whatever they could find against it: equipment, furniture, anything with weight. The building was secure, but the sound of battle from the main defensive line had intensified. "We need to get back," Vanessa said, supporting Daniel as he limped toward the exit. "The main force is in trouble." They emerged from the water building to find the complex transformed into a war zone. Fires burned in several locations, casting flickering shadows across the grounds. The defenders had been pushed back to their final position at Building 3, the emergency shelter, and the zombies were pressing against that last line with overwhelming numbers. Jessica's voice came over the radio, strained and desperate. "James, we can't hold. We need to implement Protocol Omega." Marcus didn't know what Protocol Omega was, but the way James's face went pale told him everything he needed to know. It was the final option, the last desperate gambit when all other choices had been exhausted. "Copy that," James replied, his voice hollow. He looked at his team, his eyes lingering on each face. "Protocol Omega means we abandon the outer complex and retreat to the inner bunker. We seal ourselves in and hope we have enough supplies to outlast the horde. Once we go in, we don't come out until they disperse or we run out of food and water." The enormity of what that meant settled over the group. They would be entombed in the bunker, possibly for weeks, with limited space and resources, while the zombies destroyed everything they'd built above ground. But the alternative was death, and survival meant making impossible choices. "Then let's make sure everyone gets there," Marcus said, checking his remaining ammunition and preparing for one final push through the nightmare that the Riverside Industrial Complex had become. The retreat to the inner bunker was a running battle through smoke and darkness, with James's team fighting their way toward Building 3 where the last defenders made their stand. Marcus fired his pistol with desperate precision, each bullet representing a few more seconds of survival for the group struggling toward sanctuary. They found Jessica and the main force backed against the bunker's entrance, a reinforced steel door set into the ground like a massive safe deposit box, its surface scarred from previous encounters but still intact. Emily clung to one of the elderly survivors, her small face streaked with tears but her eyes alert and aware. The transformation from frightened child to survivor had taken only days, a testament to humanity's terrible adaptability. "Get them inside," Jessica shouted, laying down covering fire as Thomas worked the bunker's complicated locking mechanism. The door swung open, revealing stairs descending into artificially lit safety. Non-combatants poured through the opening, a stream of humanity fleeing into the earth. Marcus found himself at the rear guard, standing shoulder to shoulder with Vanessa and James as the zombies closed in from all sides. His pistol clicked empty, and he drew his knife, knowing that the next moments would determine whether he saw another sunrise. A zombie lunged at him, and Marcus sidestepped, driving the blade into its temple with strength born of desperation. Another took its place immediately, and he barely managed to dodge its grasping hands. Thomas emerged from the bunker entrance, his hunting rifle barking as he provided covering fire. "Everyone in. Now." The defenders fell back in pairs, covering each other's retreat down the stairs. Marcus felt hands pulling him backward, and he stumbled down the steps as the steel door began to swing shut above him. The last thing he saw before the door sealed was the horde washing over the ground level of Building 3 like a wave, hundreds of zombies claiming the surface world as their domain. The bunker's interior was cramped and dimly lit, designed as an emergency shelter for perhaps 50 people but now holding 144 souls. The air already felt close and stale despite the ventilation system humming overhead. Jessica stood on a raised platform at the bunker's center, her voice carrying across the frightened crowd. "Listen up, everyone. I know you're scared. I know this isn't what we hoped for. But we're alive, we're together, and as long as we remain disciplined and united, we will survive this." She outlined the situation with brutal honesty. They had food for approximately 3 weeks, water for 2 if they rationed strictly, and medical supplies sufficient for basic care but nothing catastrophic. The bunker's air filtration and power systems were solar augmented, meaning they wouldn't suffocate or freeze, but comfort would be minimal. "We survive by working together," Jessica continued. "Everyone has an assignment, everyone contributes. Dr. Foster will handle medical needs. Marcus will maintain our communications equipment and try to reach other survivor groups. Thomas and Daniel will manage our resources and rationing. We adapt, we endure, and we plan for the day we reclaim the surface. The crowd dispersed to their assigned areas, and Marcus found himself in a small alcove that housed the bunker's communications setup. More sophisticated than the equipment above ground, including satellite uplink capabilities and long-range broadcast equipment. Christopher joined him, and together they began the methodical process of reaching out to whatever remained of the wider world. The first 12 hours brought only static and automated emergency broadcasts looping endlessly, recorded messages from a government that no longer existed. But on the 13th hour, a voice broke through the white noise, clear and strong. "This is Colonel Nathan Pierce, United States Army, broadcasting from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. If anyone can hear this transmission, be advised that organized military resistance continues. We have established a secure zone and are working to develop a countermeasure against the infection. All survivors are advised to fortify positions and maintain hope. Humanity will prevail." The message repeated on a loop, but it was enough to electrify the bunker. People crowded around the communications alcove, listening to proof that they weren't alone, that somewhere the fight continued on a larger scale. Marcus worked quickly to establish two-way communication, adjusting frequencies and boosting signal strength. After several attempts, he made contact. "Fort Bragg, this is Riverside Bunker, Richmond, Virginia. We read you clearly. We have 144 survivors in a secure underground facility. Request status update and any intelligence on infection patterns in our region." The response came after a brief pause, and this time it was personal, not automated. "Riverside, this is Colonel Pierce. Good to hear from you. We've been tracking infection spread patterns and have valuable intelligence. The creatures are evolving, becoming more organized, but they have weaknesses we're learning to exploit. How secure is your position?" Marcus glanced at Jessica, who nodded for him to continue. "We've been forced underground by a massive horde. Surface facilities are compromised. We have limited supplies and are in bunker mode indefinitely." Colonel Pierce's voice took on a tone of professional assessment. "Understood, Riverside. Here's what we've learned. The infected show decreased activity during extreme cold and complete immobility during sub-zero temperatures. They're drawn to noise and movement but will disperse if those stimuli are removed for extended periods, typically 7 to 10 days. They require some form of sustenance, though less than living humans. A horde without available food sources will eventually scatter to hunt. Your best strategy is to remain silent and wait them out." The information was both encouraging and challenging. 7 to 10 days of absolute silence in a bunker designed for emergency use, not long-term habitation. But it was a timeline, a concrete goal, something to hold on to. "Additionally, Colonel," Pierce continued, "we're coordinating with other survivor groups to establish supply routes and safe zones. Once your horde disperses, we can provide coordinates for resource caches and potential extraction points. We're also working on a long-term solution to the infection, but that's classified for now. Keep this frequency open for daily updates at 0600 hours." The contact with Fort Bragg transformed the bunker's atmosphere from despair to determined endurance. Jessica implemented strict protocols, quiet hours to conserve energy and reduce noise, rationing schedules that ensured fairness, and assigned tasks that kept everyone occupied and purposeful. Marcus found himself not only managing communications but also helping Emily with reading lessons, teaching her Morse code as a game to distract from the cramped conditions and constant fear. Thomas and Daniel turned the resource management into a science, tracking every ounce of food and drop of water with meticulous precision. Dr. Foster established a medical rotation, treating minor injuries and illnesses while carefully preserving their limited medications for true emergencies. Vanessa organized physical training sessions in the bunker's limited space, keeping defenders sharp and ready for whatever came next. James worked with a team to develop plans for reclaiming the surface, mapping out strategies for clearing buildings, reinforcing defenses, and establishing multiple fallback positions if they faced another overwhelming assault. Days blurred together in the artificial light of the bunker. Marcus maintained daily contact with Fort Bragg, learning that other survivor groups across the country were implementing similar strategies. A pattern emerged from the colonel's briefings. The infection, while devastating, was not invincible. The zombies' enhanced coordination came with limitations. They were vulnerable to extreme temperatures, required some form of organic matter to sustain themselves, and their behavior became less organized when their numbers dropped below a critical threshold. On the 8th day of their underground exile, Marcus detected a change in the sounds from above. The constant scraping and pounding that had accompanied their first week underground had diminished to occasional bumps and thuds. On the 9th day the sound ceased almost entirely. "The horde is dispersing," Jessica announced on the morning of the 10th day, after scouts had cautiously monitored the surface through the bunker's periscope system. Colonel Pierce's intelligence was accurate. "They're scattering to find food sources elsewhere. We still need to be cautious, but we can begin planning our return to the surface." The bunker erupted in quiet celebration, people embracing and crying with relief. But Marcus noticed that the leaders, Jessica, James, Thomas, Vanessa, remained somber. They knew that reclaiming the surface was only the beginning of their challenges. 2 days later, a carefully selected team unsealed the bunker door and ascended to the surface world. What they found was devastation. The complex's buildings stood battered but intact, though every window was broken, every door torn from its hinges. The carefully cultivated gardens had been trampled, supplies scattered and destroyed. But the infrastructure remained salvageable, and more importantly, the zombies were indeed gone, with only scattered individuals wandering in the distance. "We rebuild," Jessica said simply, surveying the destruction. "We rebuild stronger, smarter, and more prepared." Over the following weeks, the Riverside community transformed from survivors into builders of a new world. Using intelligence from Fort Bragg, they established contact with other groups, creating a network of mutual support and shared resources. Marcus's communication center became the hub of this growing network, coordinating supply runs, warning of horde movements, and connecting isolated survivors with safe havens. Emily, who had arrived as a traumatized child, became a symbol of hope and resilience, helping tend the rebuilt gardens and even learning to assist in the radio room. Kevin Harper, the young man who had nearly broken during the breach, had found his courage and now trained new defenders with patient determination. Thomas and Daniel Rodriguez developed innovative fortification techniques that they shared with other communities, improving survival rates across the network. 3 months after the bunker siege, Marcus stood on the rebuilt south wall, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The world was still dangerous, still broken, but humanity was adapting. The zombies remained a constant threat, but they were a threat that could be understood, predicted, and defended against. Jessica joined him, her presence a steady comfort. "Colonel Pierce transmitted new intelligence this morning," she said. "They've made a breakthrough in understanding the infection. There might be a way to reverse it in recently turned individuals, maybe even develop a vaccine. It's preliminary, but it's hope." Marcus smiled, thinking about how far they'd come from those desperate days when hope seemed like a luxury they couldn't afford. "We've come a long way from that communications tower." "We have," Jessica agreed. "And we have a long way still to go. But we'll go together as a community, as a family. That's our real strength, not our walls or our weapons, but our refusal to give up on each other." Below them, the Riverside Industrial Complex hummed with activity. People working together, children playing under careful supervision, defenders training, farmers tending crops, and in the communications center, Christopher monitoring frequencies for other survivors who needed the same hope they had found. The zombie apocalypse had taken the old world and ground it to dust, but from that dust, something new was emerging. Not a return to what was, but something different, forged in survival and tempered by unity. Communities like Riverside were proving that humanity's greatest asset wasn't individual strength but collective resilience, the ability to adapt, to fight back, and to discover that together they were stronger than any threat, no matter how overwhelming. As the sun climbed higher, Marcus returned to the communications center, ready to broadcast the daily message that had become his mission and his purpose. "This is Riverside calling all survivors. You are not alone. We are here. We are fighting. We are winning. And there is always room for one more. Never give up. Never surrender. Humanity survives." The message went out across the airwaves, a beacon of hope in a world overrun by zombies, a promise that the fight would continue, that humanity would adapt and endure, and that from the ashes of the old world, a new one would rise, stronger, united, and unbreakable. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the outbreak began, victory seemed not just possible but inevitable. And that made all the difference.